Okay gang, we're going to start the install on the Paxton 1200 Supercharger. I'm going to I kind of skimmed over the instructions. I know what we need to do first. We need to empty the fluids out of it, need to remove the cold air intake and the tubes, the PVC tubes that go up, and then I got to remove the injector rack. I'll get the plugs and the new injectors put on the rack. It says that you have to loosen up the intake manifold, but I think I'm going to wait on that until I find out why you need to do that. And that's as far as I've gotten. I know I have to move the power steering fill. That should be a piece of cake. There's a bracket in there to do it with. So anyway, I'm going to get started and I'll come back when I have some of that done. Okay gang, I'm actually done putting the supercharger on, but I'm going to put this at the beginning of the video because I think there's a couple of things that are very important. First of all, in conjunction, when you get one of these from Brenspeed, in conjunction with the Paxton Throwback installation manual, you also get a couple of some very important pages, and let me show you those. Okay. This was the paper that had the decals and stuff in it, and I was so carried away that I totally flew over it. But when you get this, make sure you read this. This is very explanatory, okay? And that's why it says read carefully. It talks about the changing to the 160 thermostat. Some guys don't. I chose to. I got the thermostat, put it in, and it just tells you that you need to run the engine a little cooler. Here's another thing that was very important. This should be the spark plug gap for the spark plugs that come in the kit. Now I found that the NGKs that I got were all set to 30. Okay, so we're good to go. I was good to go there. And I didn't check them in advance. I had to pull them later because I hadn't read this. So read this before you stick them in and have to pull them back out. This just talks about the delay in shipping because of COVID. We hope we're all over that. Here's the information on the fuel pump booster. There's not much different here than actually in the Vortec instructions. And here is the most important part. It's the, what is this thing called? The ATI, the IAT, intake air temperature. Brenspeed sends you this with a little extension, a wire that plugs into it, an extension. I got done with the whole project and had no idea where that went because it's not in the Paxton Vortec information. It's only on the Brenspeed information. And he does a very good job of explaining how to put it into the second runner back on the passenger side, on the underside of the intake manifold, at least with my stock manifold. And I'm not sure what you have to do with the Ford Racing intake or any other intake, but this explains on a stock intake. I believe that's a stock intake. Looks like it. But anyway, nevertheless, it's going to require a couple of tools. One of them calls for a 37/64 hole to be drilled. I used a 9/16 drill, and it worked just fine. It also says to use a 3/8 18 NPT, which I guess is normal pipe thread. You might be able to find one in your town. I was in a hurry to find one. I went to Harbor Freight and had to buy a $72 worth of kit of taps just to use a tap once in a piece of plastic that's about a 1/16 of an inch there and out, an 1/8 of an inch thick. But it was worth the money because I was able to drill the hole, successfully tap it, and put the intake air temperature sensor in that hole. And this is about it, and it's attached to the Brenspeed paper, not the Vortec paper, okay? My stupidity that I didn't find this originally. So I had to do the intake manifold twice, take the fuel injection rack off, of course, to get it off. You know, I undo everything to do that job twice. Had to do the spark plugs twice. There's a lot of things I had to do twice simply because I didn't read this first. So I'm urging you to read this first. And I'm going to explain a couple other things about Vortec and Paxton's manual, okay? Okay, here's the manual you get with the Paxton. Well, it's a nice, big informational packet, but what you got to watch out for is some of the items in here pertain to certain years of cars. Another thing that they, in my opinion, if you're buying a non-intercooled, they should have a set of instructions for that, because intercooler takes up about a quarter of the pages in this book, and you got to be real careful as to what you're looking at. And some of the terminology may make sense to them, but didn't make too much sense to me, and you got to skip forward or skip backwards to kind of find the picture that relates to what you're doing. Other than that, the manual's pretty good, with the exception, I feel like, of mounting the mounting plate on the car first. You take the, you know, it tells you to take certain bolts out on the left-hand side of the engine and put in certain washers, certain spacers, which you also have to measure, by the way, and put those in the right places so it doesn't warp the plate. It tells you to put the plate on with the idler gear on there, and then put the supercharger on. Well, I found, and what I did is I put the bolts for the supercharger through, and I put masking tape on the backside to hold them in place until I got the charger there, okay? I got a couple of bolts, was able to finger a couple of bolts in, and realized that there's no freaking way I could reach the bolts at the bottom. I don't know how they do it. They had a suggestion in here, but it was horribly, in my opinion, horribly hard to get to those bolts. So what I did is I got all the I got the plate all mounted like it's supposed to be, took the plate off, laid it on a blanket that I put on the front of the car, then laid it on the supercharger, put the bolts in the supercharger, used an air wrench to put them all on there, then took that whole assembly and stuck it back on the car. And it's not overly heavy to do that. The bolt that's down on the power steering pump is the easiest one to get in. So what I did is I held it in place, put that bolt in the hole because it'll stay in the hole and support that side of the supercharger. Then you can start the bolt on the far left, which goes into the alternator bracket hole. And you can, if you just move it around a little bit, you can get that started by hand. And remember, I had the washer fall out. There's a little washer that goes behind that spacer. Do not forget to put that back on. Do not lose it when you're moving that around or putting it back up there. Be sure that goes back on there along with the long spacer. It's a little thin, almost washer thin, that goes behind that. Don't lose that when you put it back on there. Another problem is sometimes you have to pull a bolt or something out to get the belt fed back through the way it goes. But I found it much easier to do that than to try and reach those bolts on the bottom of the supercharger. That's just a tip from me. I don't know. Maybe people don't have a problem. Maybe they have a different way of doing it. That was my way of accomplishing that, and I found it much easier. If I had done it that way in the first place, I wouldn't. There's a lot of things I wouldn't have to do a couple times. And on that note too, when you when you extend the MAF sensor, there's a gray and a gray, I believe it's a gray red, I'm not sure what color, gray red I believe, that have to be cut off at the MAF sensor and go to that intake air temperature fitting that Brenspeed tells you to put on. And be sure and put that on before you're going to have to take the intake manifold off. This tells you can lift it up to complete this job, but if you put that sensor in, you've got to take it off, turn it upside down, and the instructions tell you how to install that. but you've got to extend those wires out to be able, from underneath the intake manifold. So be sure and get that all set up before you go to put the intake manifold back on. The rest of it was pretty self-explanatory. You know, you guys know about being gentle with the plugs, not over tightening them because you'll never get them out, and you know, change all the other things are pretty well explained in here. And I would say, all in all, even though it took me 3 days working only maybe 6 hours a day, maybe 7 hours a day, I could have done it a lot faster had I not had to do several things twice. So anyway, I'm just trying to save you some time, and I'm going to get out of here. Okay, everybody. I have got all these panels off. I'm not sure whether that was necessary since I'm not intercooling, but it does make it easier to see things. I have the injector rack out. It is on the floor. I have disconnected all this wiring right here, which is the injectors. There's the fuel line. I have disconnected the fuel regulator in the back, the fuel pump regulator. I have not modified this bolt. This is the tab that we need to cut off to make room for the supercharger. I'll do that with a Dremel tool. I have a Dremel disc. Other than that, I have not loosened up the intake manifold because I'm not sure why they're going to have you do that. I guess it's probably, well, I would guess I'm going to have to replace this crossover tube, I believe. So I may just go ahead and take it off of there anyway. It's not that hard. So we'll probably do that. Next thing I got to do is drain the coolant out, and then I got to move that reservoir. Goes over here somewhere. Got to get this bottle out of here, and but that's where we're at. So those are the things that I have removed so far. I'll keep you posted. Okay, it's only been about 5-10 minutes. I've got the intake manifold off. It's very easy when you don't have the plates in there. All I have to do now is just, I'm going to clean these off with alcohol. I'm going to put a little alcohol on here, clean those off, and then tape those up so I don't get anything down in the intake. You don't want that for sure. Okay, everybody. I now have my book back out, and I was to the stage of modifying the bolt and cutting the tab off. I have cut the tab off right here with the Dremel tool, and I did not take the bolt out. I cut the bolt off right in place. I should be ready to go. The next step, they say, is to take the belt off. I'm going to take a picture of it before I get that far, so they probably have a diagram, but I'm not going to trust that. So this is where we're at. I think one of the next things I need to do is move the power steering reservoir over here, and I'm not sure if I have to remove, I think I have to remove the upper radiator hose, and I don't know about the lower one. But nevertheless, here's where we are right now. And it is now nearly 11 o'clock, and I didn't get started till about 9 or 9:30, so I'm making pretty good progress. Okay, took a lunch break. This is where I am. Got the upper radiator hose disconnected, which was no big deal. Disconnected the power steering unit. Got it moved over here where they tell you to move it to, but I'm not real happy about the clearance issue right there. It's rubbing rubber on the wire, but I think it'll be okay, but I don't like it. And they don't tell you, or at least I don't know yet, where to route these hoses to. So I don't know if they're going to route up and over the top or what, but it looks like they're going to go over the top. I don't know where they're going to go. We'll find out as we go along. But moving forward, I'm about ready to do the thermostat housing. Okay, guys, I got the new spark plugs in. I got all the coils back on, got the intake manifold back on, which was all pretty much a piece of cake. Got all the new Bosch injectors on, and I think I'm ready to slap the injector rack back in. So that's where we are right now. Once again, I'll show you. There is the clearance that we have for the radiator hose once you put the angle bracket in there, which is this, and then this ground here that went to here is now there, and that's where we're at. Okay, gang, got vacuum lines all hooked back up, got the fuel line plugged up. I think I said that in the last one. And we made the modification to the upper radiator hose, which was quite a task because there is virtually no room between the body of the throttle body and the hose. But we'll see how that works out. I guess there's many things we could see how it's going to work out, but that should be pretty good for that. So now what we're on to is mounting the plate to mount the supercharger. Okay, gang. I will say that their instruction book is totally inadequate. While they know what the pieces might be, I think the everyday Joe might not know what they are. I got the plate mounted and secure and tight. Unfortunately, now I can't get to the bolts on the back of the supercharger to tighten them up. So I'm going to have to loosen up the plate, try and tilt it forward, and see if I can get to those bolts or something. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to pan out. I got a couple of bolts in right here. This one started, not all the way in. This one is fairly loose. It's not all the way tight, as you can see. And I have one over here started, but I can't get to I cannot get to any of the other bolts. So, not exactly sure what to do. If I loosen this thing up and take this bolt out right here, I can, that bolt right there, I can kind of move this out a little bit. And I think if I do that, I can get in there and tighten up the bolts on the supercharger. The belt is routed through properly. The proper routing is to go under this idler that they put in, and then it will go over the supercharger right here. And the belt is looped right there. So it's ready to go. But it's getting the charger bolts tight. And I'm just not exactly sure how to get there from here. So, that being said, I'm tired of working on it today. We'll get on it tomorrow. Oh, by the way, their nifty little pipe reroute here actually goes up under here. Simply isn't going to work. Let me get it in the picture. It's simply not going to work. I can get it. I can get it back in there, but the problem is it touches the housing for the 62 millimeter, and it touches. Well, I think it'll touch the supercharger, and there's just enough room for the belt to clear. I'm not really sure what to do about this. I think getting a couple pieces of wood and flattening this out, putting a dimple in it over here, and flattening this out a little more here, I really don't know. It just doesn't work. I don't know. I'll mess with it tomorrow. My knees and my legs are hurting from bending over my back. But anyway, we'll get on it again tomorrow. Okay, everybody, after much fussing and fighting, I have the supercharger mounted on the plate. One thing I would recommend is mounting it on the plate with these bolts here first, because you can't get to those bolts afterwards. And then put the unit down in there and make sure you have the bolts ready down here to screw it in. And when you do that, do not lose that little washer back there, because that keeps everything straight, okay? Don't lose that if you put it all together and you put it up there. What I did is I put the belt through and everything, and then I just put a blanket up here and pulled it up and laid it up here. Then I had to, you know, reroute all the belt and everything. But at least I know for a fact that all my bolts down in here holding the supercharger to the plate are tight. So that being said, I've got everything back in order. I've got the belt routed properly. Another thing I did, and I'm not sure whether this is going to show, but I modified the plate on the back of the 62 millimeter, and I countersunk these screws. I ground it with a Dremel tool, ground the edge and everything, and now it's not, as you can see there, it's not super rubby against that thing. I think that's going to take care of it. Now when I put, and I cut a new piece of hose here, by the way, out of the piece that I had cut out. But anyways, everything's on track now. But I guess once you do this 15 times, you would know what you're doing. But anyway, let me get on with it and we'll see what I get. Okay, gang, here we are. I've got almost everything done as far as hooking it up. I've got to extend the MAF sensor. Once I get this over here figured out, the charger is all tight. I have gone back and checked all the clamps. All the clamps are tight. Everything's tight. Supercharger's tight. Belt is on. Belt is tight. There is, let's see here if I can get you in there. There is just enough clearance there between the belt and the tubing. There is just enough clearance between the tubing and the charger, and I have that tied back with a tie wrap right there. All those hose clamps are checked and tight. The water fill is all back on. I don't know what they actually call that, but it's a overpressure valve. I have the vacuum line run for that. Goes up here, goes underneath the intake manifold, comes out over here on this side of the intake, goes around and teed into the vacuum right there. PCV is in and fixed. The cam sensor is plugged in. I've got to reroute or tie up the wiring when I get the MAF sensor connected. All that wiring will be tidied up. I've got to top off the oil. They say to top off the oil in the supercharger. I haven't done that. I haven't put water in it, and I haven't put power steering fluid in it. But everything else, I believe, is done. I have not put the boost pump in. But in the engine compartment, I would say that we were on the verge of being complete. And I think everything is good. There's minimal clearance for everything because that's kind of the way it's engineered. But there is clearance and everything is in here. And I think we're good. So this is where we're at right now. Okay, everybody. So far I've got about, in total in 2 days, probably about 14 hours in working on this. Everything is kind of back. I still need to fill fluids. I have put a little bit of fluid in the power steering, but I got to turn that to get it to load, and I can't do that till I start the engine. I have the air filter and everything on. I have the MAF sensor extended. I do need a little help though. They sent me this. Does anybody know what that is? I kind of look forward to an answer because I don't know what it is. And I'm sure I'm supposed to put it in. And I've got the wiring harness for the booster pump, and I also do not know what this plug is. Wiring repair kit. I don't know what that is. If somebody can tell me on that. And I have one silicone ring left. But as you can see, there's a ring everywhere there's supposed to be a ring. I cut a piece of tubing, stuck it in here so that the air filter does not chafe on the side of the fender. It's all sturdy, you know. It's everything's in place. I'm going to go through. I've gone through some of the bolts and nuts, but I'm going to go through it and make sure everything is tight. I did make sure that the spark plugs were tight when I changed them, and I did make sure all the manifold bolts and the coils were all tight. So, but I'm going to go around and tighten up the rest of everything, and before I put all the cowling on here, and I'll get the booster pump installed, and then we'll start it up. Okay, this little doodad here is a intake air temperature sensor, and what they want you to do is they want you to put this in the intake manifold on the second cylinder back on the passenger side is where Brenspeed recommends it, and it gets a more accurate reading than the one attached to the MAF unit. So I've got to cut 2 wires off the MAF unit, connect in this extension cable and plug, get this put in the intake manifold, and to do that, here's what we're doing. Okay, I had to go buy a whole tap set at Harbor Freight to get let me see what this is, a 3/8, they call for a 3/8 NPT, which is normal pipe thread, I believe, to screw that into. So here's what we're doing. Let's see here. We crammed a bunch of a couple of towels down in there to keep the stuff from going way down in there. We made they recommend making a 37/64 hole. Well, I couldn't get the tap started with that, so I used a different bit, but I'm trying to figure out which one I used. But anyway, it's close to 9/16, so I think a 9/16 drill is what I used. I did 7/16 first. It was too small to get it started. A 9/16 seems to work, and I'm having an easy time getting the threads in there, and I'll show you when I get it mounted. Okay, so here is the tapped hole. By the way, one of the things about taps is you have to run them all the way in to get the proper size. You can't run them in part way and take it out because the threads will be too tight. And I don't know if I can show you on this tap, but it's tapered up to a point and then it gets relatively flat. Whoops. It's tapered up to a point and then it gets sort of flat, but you have to run it all the way in to get to the edge to get the proper thread size. And as you can see, this required me to take the stupid intake manifold off again, but I did check the plugs this morning. I assumed that they were set right from the factory, and I guess I should never do that, but I did. And I took a couple out, and they were at 30. So I'm leaving them there. They recommend 30 to 32, and I'm leaving them there. So I'll get this sensor put in, we'll get the intake manifold back on, then we can continue with what we were doing. Okay, I think you guys have seen this, but I have started it. I haven't got the battery cover back on, I don't have the brace, I don't have all this crap here. I don't have underneath, I don't have anything else. But I did run it for about 15 minutes sitting here, and was able to get the antifreeze back up to the correct level, power steering fluid back up to correct level, and I don't seem to have any leaks anywhere, and it seems to idle fine. So, and I did get the booster pump for the fuel pump installed today. That's a piece of cake. Just, it's genuinely plug and play, with the exception of putting a 30 amp fuse in the fuse box here, replacing a 15 with a 30. I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous video this morning, but I had to take the manifold off and put the air temperature sensor in the back side of this runner, and extend the wire. Well, you have to cut, and I will try to explain it. These two gray wires, one's gray red and one's gray, you cut those off, and those are just dead-ended right in there. And then you take them, the feed from here, as you can see, I pulled them out right there, and they tie in to the wires going back to the intake air temperature sensor, which is mounted, of course, underneath the intake manifold, which, like I said, I had to take off again this morning. So that set me back by about a day, so there would have been about a 2-day job. I haven't taken it out and driven it yet. I'm not going to put on any peripheral parts that I don't need until I go out and drive it. I'll put the battery cover back on because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to disconnect that again. And I will put the brace back on. But aside from that, and I need to tie up the drain hose, and those of you who have done this, let me go under there. It's going to be dark, but see if I can get a picture of this guy. You can see that drain hose. That drain hose comes from the bottom of the supercharger. And you use that when you change the oil in the supercharger. That's how you drain it out. Then you put the cap back on there and you refill the supercharger. I thought that was a wonderful idea. So I have to tie that up somewhere and then get the get all the plastic put up back on underneath here tomorrow or whenever I get a chance to get to it. So that's where we're at, and I won't bother showing you the booster pump. You guys I've probably seen them. They just screw into the trunk, into the tire well in the back, where the spare tire would be. Most of us that have these Mustangs, I don't think they have these Bullitt Mustangs. I don't believe they all came with a spare tire. So you have the air inflator. So anyways, it was easy to install back there, but that's it for today. Okay, this is the booster pump installed. Very simple, very simple. Mounting it, just drilling the holes for the screws, that's the hardest part. And keep in mind, and I think I said it, you have to change the 15 amp fuse in slot 41 up underneath the hood to a 30 amp, and it's a done deal. Okay, gang, here she is running. So far, no leaks or anything. I think I said that already, but I decided it's still warm outside tonight, so I thought I'd get a shot of it running. And I'll take it for a test drive tomorrow and make sure everything's good to go. Okay, gang, that's it. You've seen it running, you've seen it installed. I don't have all the peripheral things back on. I'm going to put the brace back on this evening before I go inside. I'll wait till tomorrow to drive it when it's light outside and I have work to do here for the shop. But I'm going to drive it, check it out, but I let it run for about 15 minutes here. The car got up to temperature. I made sure all the fluids were full. I looked under it, no leaks. Before I leave tomorrow, I'm going to remember to tie up the drain hose for the supercharger. And really, that's it for this install, guys. Unless something catastrophic happens, which I don't assume to be, it looks like everything is going to be smooth. So I hope you enjoyed this install video, and I hope maybe I passed something on to you that I didn't see anywhere on the net, especially on YouTube. There was no information on the installation, and I didn't cover every little tiny bit of the installation because it's in the book, okay? I'm trying to tell you what I found that I had a discrepancy with in the book, and things that I didn't know, and my stupidity of not reading the Brenspeed paper. That being said, that's it for this install of the 1200SL Paxton on a 2008 Bullitt Mustang, and we'll let you go, and thanks for watching.